In the Islamic tradition, and it didn't really come with Islam, it had already existed in Arabia, but specifically talking about the Islamic tradition, 11 months out of the 12, you and I eat, drink, do all sorts of things from the moment we wake up to the time we go to bed. We are connected to the earth, we are nourished by it, we are assaulted by it, habits are created, fears are created, traumas are created. And so this tradition comes about and says, if you examine the contents of your intellect, it all has to do with your physical life. If you examine the contents of your emotions, it has components of your physical life. If you examine the components of your desires, your fears, whatever you can basically imagine, it's founded and rooted in your experience with everyday life. So once a year, it encourages us, if you can, fast. If you smoke, from the moment the sun comes up to the time that the sun goes down, just don't smoke. If you're addicted to reading books, from the moment the sun comes up to the time the sun goes down, just don't read. If you like to drink coffee, eat food, hang out with your friends, just don't do any of those things. And there is a good amount of, I think, conflict that is created within. It's something you've been doing for the past like 11 months or 11 years, and all of a sudden you want to make some changes to your life, but you realize it's so difficult to overcome any habit, whether it's habit to drink coffee, or you look at a man or a woman and it takes you back to the time when someone did something to you that created some very, very strong and intense emotions that later on turned to trauma. So before we can actually talk about the inner components of fasting, let me just focus on the word itself. In Arabic, there are two words for fasting. One is called siyam, the other is called ramez. Siyam means to remain silent or to become quiet. There are these parts to us. There is your physical body, your emotional body, your intellectual body. There is your psychological body, and then there is your spiritual body. Now, imagine you happen to be in a relationship, physically speaking. You have been with your companion for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Emotionally, on the other hand, you don't have a relationship with this person. There is no connection. There are no narratives that bind the two of you together. And though you're physically together, emotionally, you're very, very, very far apart. Intellectually, you try to bring about certain stories or experiences that can create an emotional relationship. So what you have, you're physically with someone, emotionally you're disconnected, your Messiah, the intellect, comes down and says, can I do anything to put this relationship back into play? Now, there is going to be a good amount of psychological conflict. Something about you says, no, walk away. Something about you says, no, you can make it work. Just listen to Anthony Robbins. Watch YouTube's given lectures by Jordan Peterson. Okay, listen to Eckhart Tolle. The spiritual is Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher. He was engaged to be married to a very, very young, attractive woman. I think he was 95 and she was only 16. I'm just joking, but still. But there was something about Søren Kierkegaard, and remember, it happens usually to those who are introverts. And introverts happen to have, they're relatively short, they're thin, they oftentimes have a very gloomy, pessimistic, realistic approach to life. And just in case you read the writings of, say, Nietzsche, or you read the life story of Jesus Christ, what you need to know is that you can't mimic them, you can't copy them. There is no how-to to these people. They're just born that way. And so Kierkegaard sits down one day and says to himself, I live alone. I have no connection to any other human being. I go into my psychological cave and I think about God. I think about the meaning of my life. And whenever I write, whenever I think, whenever I feel these things, it's as if I am disconnected from the physical life. I'm disconnected from my physical body. I am free to kind of roam or fly to paradise and just roam the Garden of Eden and figure out what lives there. If I was to get married, what's going to happen to me? First, I have to save some money to have a big wedding. Then my wife will tell me, do you love me? What can I say? I have no choice but to say yes, even though I don't really. I am devoted to my soul, not so much to another person. And then she's going to ask me to go to the store and get milk, take her on vacations. And then I'll fall from grace. I will no longer be a solitary man free to think and feel about the spiritual things. I'll be brought back down to earth. And then what is it that the world of Caesar do to all people? You eventually get executed by the responsibilities for which you don't really care, but you have no choice but to oblige. So, let's say that at the age of 10, something happened to your physical body. So if, for example, such a person would come to you and say, I want to be like Jesus Christ or Mother Teresa. As a good teacher, first you need to get to know your students really, really well. Then you need to figure out where it is exactly that they're stuck. It may be that you're reading the Bible, but you're not really reading the Bible to salvage your soul. You're reading the Bible to overcome the trauma. If, for example, you have trauma on the inside, something needs to happen to your physical body. It needs to be put in an environment where first, the emotions you have or the feelings you have repressed for many, many years can first come out. But for those emotions to come out, you need trust. You need comfortability. Okay? You don't need the Bible. You need to fast. And the way you fast is you put your physical body in an environment where you have a support system. Now, your teacher is not simply going to be like a therapist, keep asking you questions so you can relive the experiences that are horrifying for you. What they'll do, for the most part, like a good surgeon, they will cut you. They will open the wound, you have a lot of pain, you'll get to see things, and every time you scream, they'll hold you. They'll support you, they'll protect you. And little by little, as you express these thoughts and emotions, you realize it's no longer as horrifying as it used to be. And the point I'm trying to make is this. Sometimes you need to fast physically. Sometimes you need to fast emotionally. Sometimes what you realize is that some intellectual questions are really, really good. But when someone asks me such questions, I say, this is America. People are lonely, people are depressed, people smoke all the time, drink all the time, they do therapy all the time, they have trauma within them all the time. What the hell is Hegel going to do to them? So when someone asks me such questions, I say, okay, this person does not need to fast. They don't need to fast emotionally. What they need to fast is, don't ask questions that don't really belong to you. This is the wrong nourishment for you. Remember, you have no choice. If you want these different 5 parts of you to remain alive, they need nourishment, okay? Fasting means what? You cut someone from the things that have been feeding them or nourishing them. Why is there trauma? Because you have a certain feeling, you want to overcome it. The problem is those feelings become habitual. You have them all the time. So even though you want to run away from the feeling or just getting rid of them completely, every single morning you wake up, you have this volcano of feeling erupting, and so you get fed by them. And so it's very, very difficult to ever overcoming what they call trauma. So remember, fasting is about looking at a student, figuring out what their habits are, and those habits become an obstacle. Someone who doesn't talk very much, that becomes their habit. What is it that they need to be nourished by to overcome that particular tendency? You go to them, you slap them, you smack them, you punch them, and you say, ask a goddamn question. They go like this, ask a question. And then first they ask, their voice begins to shiver a little. Why? They're nervous. They feel as if they're being judged by other people. They're being judged by themselves. And when they open their mouth to put a few words together, they fumble all over the place. And their task is to keep talking and talking and talking until they get it right. Some people talk too much. So every time their hand goes up and says, I got a question, you look at them and say, shut up. And the point is, what works for one person will not work for another. What is appropriate for one person is not appropriate for another. Which means that every human being cannot but be in a custom-made relationship. Remember, Siyam basically means to be quiet. If your body desires something, quiet it down. If you have a trauma that's obstacling your growth, your physical movement, intellectual movement, you need to make it quiet. And there are ways to make it quiet. And you can't do this on your own. It is impossible. The other name for fasting is called Ramez. Ramez is a baby camel. But a camel lives in the desert, can go without sleep, water, food for about 40 days. And the number 40 is symbolic in most of the religious, philosophical, esoteric traditions. The number 40 is a number for perfection. Camels usually are used to take stuff from point A to point B. Between point A and point B is a desert. Just in case you want to overcome a trauma, it means the following. Trauma, regardless of what it is and how it came about, feeds you in some shape or form. You are angry. That's nourishment. Anger leads to hate. The point is, trauma creates meaning. It makes you a victim of sorts. It gives you identity. Now you say you want to overcome it. It means the following. This is trauma, and this, let's just say, is calm or peace. To get there, you have to travel this desert. All the things that used to nourish you here must slowly fall away here. There is nothing that's going to nourish you. You are in the desert. There are no physical nourishment, no intellectual nourishment, which means that you can't go back in time and relive the experience. Because every time you do, emotions are going to flare. And it's going to impact the way you think, you feel, and the way you act. And so in the Quran, which is the Bible of the Muslim world, if you want to fast from anything, it means you will eventually find yourself as a baby camel in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing that can feed you, nourish you. If you have a teacher, and you need to understand what it means to have a teacher. When someone emails me and says, I'm your student, I say, no, you're just enrolled in a class, you're not my student. First, it takes time to get to know someone. Then it takes time to like them. Then it takes time, once you like them, to trust them and to feel comfortable with them. Then it takes time and a little bit of a shock to come to realize, no, you don't just like them, you love them. And once you love them, something really interesting happens. You relinquish all of your physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual powers. You say, what he says goes. If you are a Muslim and you come to me and you say, can we talk about so-and-so? I look at you, I ask you some questions, I say, no, we're not going to talk about so-and-so, we're going to tackle this, and you have to be okay with it. If you're a Muslim and this is your month of fasting, and I come to realize that fasting really is no good for you, what you need to do is to come to my house and eat food with me. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It means that you have to fast from the belief that you are a Muslim, that you need to fast. That if your teacher asks you to do something, you do it without question, complete faith. Now, this particular narrative does not exist in the Western tradition.